Hello, everybody. So good to see so many familiar names and some new names, which is great. On behalf of the Long Island Arts Alliance and our board of directors, I want to welcome you to our latest arts management virtual webinar. For those of you who on here who I have not yet met, my name is Lauren Wagner. I am the director of the Alliance and the one pretty much flooding your emails every day. So I apologize about that, but it's all for good reason lately. I appreciate you all being here for valuing art in the era of COVID-19, ticket pricing for online and in-person performances. I want to take a second to thank the Long Island Community Foundation and Dave Oakhorn for their continued support of our educational programming and development initiatives, as well as their dedication for the Long Island arts sector as a whole. We really appreciate their continued support. I also see a couple of my board members, including our chair, Marianne Conway, co-chair, Dale Lewis, and the founder of the Long Island Arts Alliance, Mr. Roger Tillis, on here. So hi, guys, and thanks for being here. I do have a few things that I want to touch on before we get to today's presentation. There have been some recent updates to the COVID-19 relief package, and I have been doing my very best to keep you all up to speed, and I hope that the messages and the newsletters have been helpful. However, there will be two important free webinars this week that I really encourage you all to register for if you haven't already. The first one is the Small Business Administration. They're actually hosting a free webinar tomorrow at 3:00 p.m. to provide a preliminary overview of the Shuttered Venue Operators Grants. And that's also known as the SOS or the Save Our Stages program. I'm hoping we're going to get a lot of our questions answered in this webinar. So I will encourage you to register as soon as possible. And once I'm through all of this, I will put those links into the chat feature. The second that I recommend you register for is the Arts Action Fund and Americans for the Arts will be presenting the first in a two-part webinar series on Friday at 2:00. So it's Friday the 15th at 2. And that will focus on the new payroll protection program, the increase in loan forgiveness, the EIDL loans and advances, pandemic unemployment assistance, and general appropriations updates. The second session, which will be next Friday at 2:00, will focus on a whole different set of information. So I encourage you to sign up for those two webinars. Other than that, if the SOS program is not for you and the only thing that you're focused on is a new PPP or a first run PPP program, loan, which is the Paycheck Protection Program, that opened on Monday. So if you haven't already, please get in touch with your financial institutions and get the ball rolling on that. Okay, lastly, I want to encourage you all to become members of the Alliance if you haven't already. I see a lot of current members, a lot of lapsed members, and some new people on here. So I would love to have you guys join the Alliance. I've been working really hard on creating some new perks that are really beneficial to you guys. And I'm happy to announce that as of yesterday, we partnered with Nonprofit Data Solutions, who are offering active Long Island Arts Alliance members a 20% discount on their data management and CRM systems. They're local, they're right here on Long Island, and we're so grateful to them to provide that to our members. Okay, now on to today's program. We will be recording and we will make the slides available to you. I know that's always the first question that pops up. If you have a question for our presenters, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom. You can add a new question. You can upvote existing questions. We will make time for that at the end of the webinar. So a little background, I first saw Jamie and Jennifer give a similar presentation at this year's virtual National Arts Marketing Conference in December. Literally as soon as they finished, I think it was within minutes, I was like, you have to present for us. So I know that I really enjoyed their presentation. It was by far the most informational. So I really hope that you walk away with a bit more confidence in pricing your online tickets and your online performances. And it gives you some tools to kind of figure that out for yourselves. So JCA Arts Marketing collaborates with cultural organizations to increase revenue, boost attendance, and grow patron value. They provide consulting and software services to institutions across multiple genres, including museums, dance companies, opera companies, performing arts centers, symphonies, and theaters. Jamie Alexander is the Associate Director of JCA Arts Marketing, and she leads her team in its efforts to increase revenue, boost attendance, and grow patron engagement for the arts organizations around the country. Some of her clients include the Lyric Opera of Chicago, Kimmel Center for the Performing Arts, Kitchener-Waterloo Symphony, Steppenwolf Theater Company, Oakland Museum of California, and Victory Gardens Theater. Jennifer Sowinski is their consulting analyst. She uses her passion for data-driven decision-making to guide organizations to help them leverage their data to increase revenue and grow attendance. Some of her clients include Minnesota Orchestra, Austin Opera, La Mirada Theater Company, Cincinnati Opera, and Spolita Festival. So with that, I will pass it on over to our presenters, and I'll see you at the end of the program.
Great, thank you, Lauren. So welcome everybody. We're really excited to be here with the Long Island Arts Alliance, and thanks again to Lauren for inviting us to be here. And I really appreciate everybody coming, and I know it's an especially busy time for everybody, especially with the Save Our Stages Act just coming out, thankfully. So we really appreciate you being here, and it's nice to see you all. So just some quick, thank you, Lauren, for the introduction. I'll just say again, I'm Jamie Alexander. I am Associate Director of JCA Arts Marketing. And I've been at JCA for about 4 years. I came from a theater background, theater marketing background at Steppenwolf Theater and the Denver Center for the Performing Arts. And I use the pronouns she, hers, and live in Chicago in the ancestral lands of the Miami, Potawatomi, Peoria, and Kickapoo people. And I'll let Jennifer introduce herself.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Jennifer Sowinski, consulting analyst with JCA Arts Marketing. I've been here about 3.5 years, and my background is in ticketing and audience services, especially in theater. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm coming to you from Alexandria, Virginia, just outside of DC, which is the ancestral land of the Piscataway and Nacotchtank people.
So for those of you who aren't familiar with us, as Lauren said, we collaborate with cultural organizations across North America. We help organizations to increase their revenue, boost attendance, and grow patron loyalty. Our approach is very data-driven, so we determine what your data is saying and help you use data to craft effective marketing strategies. And we've worked with hundreds of clients across North America. We're mostly known for our work in pricing, which is the topic we'll be speaking about today. So in today's session, we're going to talk about how to price your tickets in this incredibly strange time that we find ourselves in. And we'll be talking about ticket pricing both for performing arts organizations and for museums or attractions, which are similar in foundation, but have a few differences in practices. So we'll start the session by laying the groundwork for our principles, our pricing principles, which are based in value-based pricing. Then we'll talk about how to approach pricing for online and digital performances. And then we'll give you some tips on pricing and revenue management for the reopening of your venues and the resumptions of in-person performances and events. And finally, we'll wrap up and answer any questions you have about the topics we've discussed. And again, feel free to enter any questions you have in the question and answer box, and the chat box is also open as well. Okay, so let's dive into value-based pricing. Again, this is the framework on which all of our pricing practices are based, even in the COVID world. So it's an important place to start. So to put you in the mindset to understand value-based pricing, I want you to first think about what you would pay for a theater ticket. So just take a second, think about what you would pay for a theater ticket. Now, I bet your first thought was, can you give me more details? Are we talking about during regular times or COVID times? What's the performance? Who are the actors in the creative team? What theater am I going to? Where's my seat? And it's true that your willingness to pay for a theater ticket is dependent on your answers to all of these questions. But the dollar figure that you arrive at is based on what's important to you. Someone else may pay something completely different for the same theater production. And this is the basis of value-based pricing. There's a quote that sums up value-based pricing perfectly. And the quote is that everything is only worth what someone will pay for it. And I'm sure you've heard this quote before, but could you guess who said it? Most people guess Adam Smith, but it's much older, which which is interesting because even back in 1st century BCE, people were talking about value-based pricing. And this expression still describes the key to value-based pricing, which is to understand your audience's willingness to pay based on what's important for them. So there are 3 different types of pricing, and actually there are many more, but we're just going to focus on these 3. The first is cost-based pricing, and this is where a unit price is calculated by dividing costs by the expected volume of sale and potentially adding a profit margin. This is an extremely inefficient way to determine pricing for the arts because high production costs can result in a unit price which is way beyond the market's willingness to pay, whereas a low cost may simply leave money on the table. There's also competition-based pricing, which is where you look to competitors to set price points. And we use this to a degree in pricing for the arts, but essentially what you end up with this type of pricing is somebody else's pricing strategy. And it's problematic because every organization is different. So what works for another organization might not work for yours. And then we come to value-based pricing, where you price based on your audience's willingness to pay. And this is important because everybody values art differently. So there's no one size fits all for pricing. In value-based pricing, you look externally to your audience to understand their unique perceptions of value and price accordingly. And in value-based pricing, it's important to remember that someone will only buy something if they believe the price being charged is balanced by the value being offered in the context of their experience and their disposable income. Too often, conversations only focus on the price side of the scale. We ask ourselves if we can change the price of X, but what we should also think about is if we can change the value of X. So there are 3 things you need to understand about people's perceptions of value that will help you understand the pricing best practices that JCA Arts Marketing recommends. And they're that people's perceptions of value are relative, they're based on unique interests, and they're based on motivation. So first, let's look at why perceptions of value are relative. This goes back to some basic psychology. And as a species, we're not good at assessing the absolute value of things. So we assess something's value by comparing it to other things, which can be subconscious. Here's a classic example of how we assess value through relativity. Here, we're judging the size of the orange circles based on the size of the gray circles around them. So the orange circles look like they're different sizes, but in fact, they're the same size. So this is a really important concept to understand when we're optimizing pricing, because we need to consider that people are weighing prices against each other when making decisions. And this is why, for example, VIP tickets can be very effective, not just for the money they bring in themselves, but also because they make the next most expensive ticket look more attractive. So next, let's look at how people's perceptions of value are based on their unique interests. And this is all about utility. So something that's useful for me is not necessarily useful for you. For example, I hate running, but I know that it's good for me, so I have to buy shoes to do it. And I'm going to look for the best bargain out there because I don't want to spend a lot of money on something that I don't like. On the other hand, I love to tango dance, and I used to dance all the time before COVID in these really pretty shoes. And because of my love for dance, I'm willing to pay a lot for these shoes. On the flip side, my mom, who is a runner, will pay much more for the running shoes, but she doesn't dance. So the shoes would be worthless to her. So here we learned that the price one person would pay for something is different from the price the next person would pay for the same thing. So people's willingness to pay is not based on the absolute value of the thing. And finally, people's perceptions of value are also based on motivation. In the arts in particular, the value of an experience is based on an individual's motivation for having that experience. So somebody attending a performance, for example, could be motivated by the art itself, or maybe they're going on a date night and their primary motivation is to spend time with that special someone, or they could be going to an event to get engaged, or they could be going to see their favorite star. The value of each of these experiences is going to be different, and people are going to be willing to pay different ticket prices for each of these experiences. So we have to accommodate for people's different perceptions of value. This is the reason for differentiated pricing, which is something that we almost always recommend. And differentiated pricing is the term used when prices of a single production vary between seats or performances, or a single experience in the case of a museum or exhibit. By having different price points, you're accommodating people's varying willingness to pay by unlocking value for your organization. So to understand why price differentiation helps you unlock value and increase revenue, let's look at a simple supply and demand chart. Usually, though not always, higher prices will mean a lower volume of sales, and lower prices will result in more sales. This relationship is known as the price elasticity of demand. So if price determines the volume of something you can sell, then having only one price must ultimately limit sales volume as well as your income. There will always be people who might have decided to purchase had the price been lower, which would result in a higher volume of sales. And equally, there will be people who would have paid more, which would result in more income. So there's therefore an intrinsic value in offering a range of different prices in order to optimize both the volume of tickets sold and the income generated. And since it's inherently beneficial to offer differentiated prices, we also might need to make sure that any difference in price is justified by a difference in value. In other words, there needs to be a reason why I'm asking you to pay more or less. And these reasons are what we call value fences. So here's a quick overview of the types of value fences that we use in the arts. First, you have your inventory value fences. For example, charging different prices by product or event, by day of week, time of day, or type of programming. An example here for a museum is that you might have a late afternoon discount or a midday premium. You also have customer behavior value price fences. So you could have pricing incentives that encourage repeat visits, bigger party sizes, or online booking or advanced commitment. And then there are value fences related to demographics. So maybe there are different prices for locals or young people or families. And finally, there are value fences by added value. So this is where you could offer higher prices for different prices for a food and beverage package or bundled merchandise or artist interactions. And we think that flexibility as a service will also become increasingly relevant. And this means asking people to perhaps pay a higher price in order to have the flexibility of exchanging their tickets in case, for example, they get sick. So to conclude this section of the foundational elements of value-based pricing, I want to emphasize that your values, your vision, and your mission should inform everything that you do, and that includes price. So your brand is a reflection of your values, vision, and mission, and your prices should be as well. Price can be an excellent communicator of value and values and the values of your organization. So that's a quick basic overview of value-based pricing. And now Jennifer is going to talk about how the principles of value-based pricing apply to digital performances or events.
Great, thanks, Jamie. So digital content is obviously playing a significant role in the current season, and it's going to continue to be important even once things start opening for in-person audiences again. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how to think about pricing for digital content. And if your organization is still putting all of your digital content out there for free, I want to encourage you to consider, kind of while you're listening to this part of the presentation, whether it might be time to start charging for that content. So the first thing that I want to note is when you're thinking about pricing for digital, you're really just talking about pricing. The concepts are all the same. We're just talking about selling a different product. So I'm going to talk through some common pricing concepts and practices, and then how we can apply those concepts to streaming and digital content. And then I also want to make sure to point out that these concepts are just as applicable to all of the pricing that you do across your organization. So let's talk about some of these concepts and how they apply. So as Jamie already explained, value is relative, and it's going to be different for each patron and each event. So it's important to think about how you can tell your patrons what your digital offering is worth. They need to be given information to help them understand the value. And this idea is especially key for digital offerings because it's still relatively new. It's a new experience for your customers. So they may not have a price point in mind, and they might not know what to expect or what to kind of compare it to. In fact, JCA Arts Marketing, we recently completed a study of digital audiences. We analyzed data from digital theater performances that occurred between April and September of 2020. And we found that 43% of digital audiences had never attended in person at that organization. And of those who had attended in person, 27% hadn't been in person in the prior year. Granted, at this point, a year is most of the pandemic, but we're talking about performances that happened last spring. So that's a pretty significant amount of time. So that makes it really important for you as an organization to communicate what the value of your content is, because you can't assume that your audience already has that reference point. They may not. So we'll start here by talking about anchor prices. And an anchor price is just the price that customers reference when making purchasing decisions. So in retail, it could be something as simple as comparing the name brand product to the store brand. The name brand is the anchor telling someone how much they're saving by buying the store brand. So you can help your customers understand the value of your product by giving them something to compare it to. In other words, you can influence the anchors of your audience. So there are some things you might think about using that I would consider good anchors, things you want your patrons to compare your prices to, such as the cost of your typical full price single tickets. Remember, we just saw that the majority of digital audience members have probably not attended in person in over a year, so they may not know what your regular single ticket price is. You can use previous prices. So this might be a comparison to what you've charged for these products or similar things in the past. Or it might be that you're offering a limited time deal. We see things like this all the time in retail, and it is really compelling. And then there are also anchors that are not so great. So when choosing to purchase content online, some patrons might think about streaming services that they subscribe to and use those as an anchor price. But I think those are bad anchors because, first of all, the product that we're providing is not the same. It's not really a great comparison. We don't want customers using those services as an anchor, but inevitably, many of them will. Another bad anchor is free. And obviously, there's a lot of free content online. Some of it has been really good content, and you may have already put digital performances out for free yourself. We'll talk about how to correct that in a moment, but free is a really powerful anchor. This is one of the reasons it's really important for the arts industry as a whole to be charging something for their products, because once consumers get used to receiving something for free, it's really hard to overcome that anchor. So in order to separate yourself from these price anchors and biases that your patrons are carrying, you want to dissociate yourself from the products they associate with those anchors. So think about what is your organization specifically offering. You need to show potential buyers what makes this show, this exhibit produced by your organization unique. And the way to do that is to tell a story. Don't forget how important story really is in marketing. So remember, your organization is local. Your organization is unique from streaming services or online-only platforms because it exists in real life in a location. So make sure you're telling your online audience why your organization is important to your community and invite them to be part of that community. Second, your art is curated. And I think that's a really underutilized asset that we have right now. When everyone is sick of scrolling through menus, deciding what to watch, you spent a lot of time choosing the right content and then choosing to put it online. So tell your potential audience members why you chose what you did and why it matters. And there's value in scarcity. When you attend a theater performance, that is an experience that only happens once, only at that moment. And we have the opportunity to kind of lean into that and create a similar environment around digital content. So customers might purchase a stream that's available for 24 hours, or they might have a 4-week window to purchase. Or maybe they're tuning into a performance that's truly being streamed live, which mimics as close as possible to that kind of communal experience. And some of these restrictions are even forced on us by unions and rights holders and things, but we can kind of take advantage of that because they really do set us apart from other online content and can add value. So it's important to think about each piece of your marketing and purchase path and understand how it's communicating value and look for opportunities to maximize your revenue. Some organizations that I've been working with have been inclined to phrase the cost of their digital tickets as a donation, with the thought process that people will be more generous and more willing to pay if they felt like they were doing a good deed, which is a really nice thought. But if you've been paying attention so far, I hope you might recognize kind of the flaw in that logic. What you're doing is you're leading your customer to think about that $25 donation as a $25 donation and $0 spent on the price of the ticket. So by asking customers to provide a donation for the ticket, you're actually devaluing your actual product. And that's not to say that you shouldn't ask for a donation in the purchase path. You absolutely should ask for a donation, but you should do that after the customer has already chosen the amount they're willing to spend on the ticket itself. In that study I mentioned earlier, we also took a look at donations that were added to the cart along with digital tickets. And we found that at organizations where they were asked for a separate donation, almost 10% of buyers added a donation, and the median donation amount was $10. So if you're not adding that extra donation ask on top of the ticket price, you could be missing out on some pretty significant revenue. So some of you may have noticed I just mentioned something about customers choosing their price. And I want to point out that you can absolutely offer multiple price points for stream performances, events, etc., even if the different prices are for the exact same content. And you might be thinking, why would I offer different prices for the same product? Remember, first of all, that each potential buyer is going to place a different value on that experience. So offering multiple prices allows everyone to choose the price that best matches their perceived value. The key is really setting up the value proposition so that buyers understand why they might choose one price over another. You might use something as simple as calling out the price that most closely matches your in-person price, or you might use value fences such as how many people are watching the performance. Do they get extra content or add-ons? Or maybe they get greater flexibility in viewing time, a longer period to watch or multiple viewings. And then once you decide to offer multiple prices, the next obvious question is, which prices are you going to offer? So when you're setting your prices, there's two pieces to consider. And the first is range. That is, what is the difference between the highest and the lowest price you're offering? And then it's really important to think about the relationship between your prices, because the relationship is going to have a really big impact on what people ultimately choose. And this concept of range and relationship is really important whenever you're setting prices, whether it's for digital or an in-person experience. So I want to take a minute and look at an example of this. So this is a set of prices ranging from $15 up to $100. We have $15, $25, $50, $75, and $100. And this has been a pretty common set of prices that I've seen, especially in the kind of early on in the pandemic when everyone was streaming their initial shows. And there's some really good things about this range of prices. There's a good number of options. Science has told us that the human brain has the capacity to handle 5 to 9 choices. Once you get more than that, you kind of have some decision paralysis problems. It's also a nice range of prices. $15 is a good accessible price point for a lot of organizations, and $100 is high, but there's certainly people who want to support the organization and would be willing to pay that price. So this range should allow everyone to choose a price that works for them. And I'm not saying this exact range is right for every organization, but hypothetically, it's a nice large range of prices. But there are also some things I don't like about this particular set of prices. So if we take a second to think about the difference between each of these prices, they're pretty even. $10 at the beginning and then $25 after that. And at first glance, this kind of makes sense, evenly space out the prices. But there's another way to think about these jumps, and that's as a percentage increase from one price to the next. So when we look at it this way, consider that $25 increase from $25 up to $50. That's a 100% increase. It's doubling the price from one to the next. So if I'm someone who is thinking, I'm definitely willing to pay $25, and I might consider even paying a little bit more than that, but then my next option is to double the price to get up to $50, it's probably pretty unlikely that I'm going to be willing to pay the $50. So this organization isn't going to make as much money from my purchase as they could have. And certainly it's not that everyone's sitting here doing the math on these percentages, but this is actually how our brain is interpreting the prices, whether we realize it or not. So I would propose this adjustment to our prices, and I've really only made 2 changes. I've added a price point at $35, and I've dropped the $75 price down to $70. Now, when we look at the dollar amount differences, they increase as we get to the higher prices, which means that our percentage difference is much more even across the price points than it was before, around 40% for each increase. So now that person who is willing to pay a little bit more than $25 has the option to go up to $35, which is going to feel like a much more reasonable and likely increase that someone might be willing to pay. So the goal is, by setting up an ideal range and relationship of prices, you're going to be able to maximize what someone is willing to pay, and it will be easier to encourage someone to consider that next price point. And there are some things you can do to encourage movement from one price point to the next. In behavioral economics, that's called nudging. And a nudge is just a small thing that you can do to encourage your patrons to exhibit the behavior that you want. I guarantee you're already doing some things like this. Something as simple as highlighting the Buy Now button is an example of nudging. For a really simple example, look at these two options at the bottom of a purchase page. So in orange, you have the option to add to basket with donation. And then on the other side, a much smaller link, not highlighted, there's the option to add without a donation. So this is clearly setting up the donation as the default option, but it doesn't eliminate the other options. So this is a really great example of a nudge. Another really common example, whenever you go online and buy, say, a software product, I'm sure you've seen something like this before. They display the options and highlight one for you and label it as best value, or in this case, most popular. So they're encouraging you to choose a particular option, in this case, gold. So this is an example that we can absolutely adapt for online sales. Think about how you might highlight one particular option and label it as the recommended price. Or you could highlight the price that most closely matches your regular ticket price so that the patron kind of has that as the visual reference. This particular example of nudging, might not be right for every organization, but I would encourage you to think about what behavior you're looking for from your patrons and then find little ways to encourage that behavior. So to sum things up, I want to give you some things to consider as you're thinking about your online content and how it might be priced. First, this is something I actually haven't talked about yet, but is important to consider. How do your digital offerings fit in with your subscription and membership offerings? Do subscribers or members automatically get digital access, and what kind of value does that add for them? Or is there value in offering a streaming-only membership or a subscription, or perhaps a hybrid option? Remember that pricing for digital is not happening in a bubble. It's important to consider how these fit in with your in-person offerings, especially as we look ahead to seasons that might be a hybrid of in-person and digital. Remember that the same principles of pricing apply whether you're pricing online or in-person content. Don't feel like you need to start from scratch just because it's a new product. The most important thing you can do is communicate with your patrons about the value of your online content and set it apart from other online options. Make sure to offer multiple price points so that everyone can buy at the price that works best for them. And find small ways that you can nudge your patrons into the behavior that you prefer. So with those final thoughts, I'm going to pass things back over to Jamie, and she's going to talk about reopening in person.
Great, thanks, Jennifer. So we're going to move on to talk about pricing for the magical day when you get to reopen your doors and resume live and in-person events. And it's important to understand how to price your tickets so that you could be accessible to an audience that may be more price sensitive due to COVID, and so that you can recoup some of the revenue that you've lost over the shutdown. So here are the 3 steps that we recommend taking as you plan your pricing strategy for reopening. The first is to set your starting prices, then create a strategic discounting plan, and then be flexible with your prices. And I'll go through each of these steps. So the first step is to set your starting prices to maximize revenue and accessibility. As we're setting our prices, we first need to estimate the audience's willingness to pay. So in normal times, we would estimate your audience is willing to pay by using your historical data in your database to understand your audience's demand for specific price points. However, in the time of coronavirus, what people paid for experiences before the pandemic might not be as relevant now. And it might be tempting to assume we have to lower prices due to the economic crisis we witnessed. But we recommend that you don't make that assumption. Chances are there's a section of your audience that wasn't severely financially affected by COVID and places the same value on attendance. And additionally, you want to leave room in your pricing for discounting, which will be an incentive for people to come back to the theater. And we'll talk about that more in a bit. Instead of automatically lowering your prices, we recommend you do research on your audience's price sensitivity to get hard data points on what people are able and willing to pay. The best way to do this is through primary research, and the research methodology that we recommend is conjoint analysis. Or you can also survey and speak directly to your audiences. There's also a lot of industry-wide research out there right now. You've probably heard of the Audience Outlook Monitor, Culture Track, the Know Your Own Bone blog. They're all national surveys that can help you understand people's intentions and to attend and their willingness to pay. So whenever we undertake a primary research project on pricing, we always find that there are three broad cohorts of respondents. The first is people who are completely disinterested. They're not going to attend, and pricing makes no difference to that. And then there are those who are interested, but they're price sensitive. So pricing is a material factor in their decision to engage or to not engage. And those who are interested and not price sensitive, these are folks where there's headroom to increase both volume and revenue. Here's some more specific audience segments which you should consider in your pricing decisions for reopening as well. Your reboot may naturally be geared towards the markets boxed here, as they're more likely by their basic demographics to be mobile during the pandemic. And each of these segments is price sensitive to varying degrees. So for example, we know that price is more of an issue for families, and that seniors tend to be less price sensitive, but they really value their discount, their senior discount, even if it's just $1 off. And there will obviously be some movement between these groups because of unemployment and financial hardships. The price sensitivity will also vary by geography and attraction. So we can't really generalize about price sensitivity, but one generalization that we can make based on our research is that people are not as price sensitive in general about visiting an attraction as they are about something that is typical to daily life, like buying groceries. So for one, they don't visit a museum or a theater with the same frequency at which they buy consumer goods. But more importantly, when they visit a cultural organization, they're paying for much more than just a means to the end. They're paying for an experience and an emotional need to be fulfilled. So after you assess your audience's price sensitivity, you come to the point where you need to set your prices. And from our previous section about the foundations of value-based pricing, you already know what differentiated pricing is. And it's incredibly important to differentiate your pricing once you reopen your doors. That way you're allowing people who can pay more for tickets to do so and help you with your revenue, while keeping lower price points for those who are more price sensitive. So there are several ways you can differentiate ticket prices. And these are some of the value fences that we had talked about earlier. So first, you can have a different set of prices for different performances or exhibitions, like having different prices for well-known works compared to more niche works. Also, if you have multiple venues, you have the option of charging a different set of prices for each venue. You can also charge different prices for different days of the week or time of day. And this is the most popular form of price differentiation. An example is setting weekend prices more expensive than weekday prices if they show more demand. And finally, if you're a performing arts organization, you can charge different prices for different areas of the house. Like maybe aisle seats are more expensive since they're usually in demand. And also remember Jennifer's explanation of range and relationship. So this is really important in differentiating prices for in-person experiences too. You want to make sure that price increases are proportional to each price, so there aren't any large jumps that people have to make tough decisions about making or not. And we'll also have some new pricing considerations to think through when you're creating your reopening pricing strategy. First, consider value fences. So the value fences, the old value fences that we just talked about will still apply, but there might be some new value fences that pop up that allow you for different opportunities for differentiated pricing. And the first is timed entry. So if you're a museum requiring advanced booking to ensure social distancing, you can use price to shift demand. So if Saturday afternoons, for example, fill up really quickly, but Sunday mornings are slow, maybe you price the Saturday afternoon time slot higher than the Sunday morning time slot to push people into Sundays. And additionally, oops, that's my spot here. Additionally, seasonal demand may shift. Maybe during the warmer months, people are more inclined to go to cultural events than in the colder months, where there's likely to be a higher risk of the virus. And you can adjust your prices to prepare for this. And finally, you'll need to consider how new online experiences are priced relative to in-person experiences, as Jennifer just shared with us. So for example, does a virtual tour cost the same as an in-person tour? And then there are some new revenue management tactics to consider in your pricing strategy. So if you're a museum, that now requires advanced ticket booking. When you release your tickets to be on sale matters. So we'd like to compare this to a long-running Broadway show where they release blocks of tickets at a time. So you want to strategically time the release of tickets to build excitement and incentivize people to book their tickets early, because the earlier people buy, the more you'll be able to capitalize on high demand. And also when you release blocks of ticket matters. So you want to make sure that you go on sale with the optimal, you want to make sure that you go on sale with the optimal amount of inventory when you release your tickets for sale. So of course, for each entry time, you want to make sure you have the right amount of tickets on sale for social distance practices. And you'll also want to be intentional about how many days, weeks, months you put on sale at a single time. And finally, requiring advanced booking also creates a fantastic opportunity for dynamic pricing, which we'll talk more about shortly. And a large consideration, which I'm sure a lot of you are thinking about, is whether or not you'll need to factor in social distancing to your reopening plans. So just remember that in the case of socially distanced performances or museum exhibits, the same principles of pricing that we've been talking about still apply. So notably, you'll still need to differentiate your pricing to accommodate for a variety of levels of willingness to pay. And this applies even in the case of general admission houses or performances. And you might just need to look for alternative ways to differentiate the pricing, like by entry time or purchase time, or by having a pay what you will model. And also, I don't think any of you would actually do this, but make sure not to price gouge. In the case of socially distanced performances or events, you may have supply outweigh demand since your capacity will be significantly limited. So it might be tempting to raise prices as high as they will go, but this would create a serious accessibility problem. So instead, you want to make sure you're offering opportunities for people to pay top price, like VIP tickets, while still having lower accessible price points available. So once you've established your starting prices, the second step in pricing for reopening is to have a strategic discounting plan to incentivize patrons to return to your venue. And discounting will be helpful to use early in your single ticket sales cycle to start generating demand and getting people back into the habit of attending artistic events. Your audience may need that extra nudge to attend theater or museums again because they might be hesitant to return due to health or financial concerns, or they might just not be thinking of going to a cultural event or forgot how much they love it. And a discount can help incentivize people to come back. So let's first talk about why discounting works. So discounting works because it sends a strong value message. It suggests that you get more value for less. So using a theater example, a $20 seat for $10 is better than a $10 seat because we assume the seat is worth $20 rather than $10. So in some ways, the ticket maintains its original price tag and therefore its original value in our minds. And there are two types of discounts. First, there are social discounts, which are mission-driven initiatives to increase access, like student tickets, under 30 tickets, senior citizens tickets, et cetera. And there are promotional discounts, which are used to stimulate sales. So focusing just on promotional discounting, there are pros and cons of this tactic. The pros are that it creates the perception of getting more than what you paid for, and it can appeal to people who value your product at a lower price or maybe more price sensitive. And the cons are that discounting can't create demand when there isn't any. So it won't convince somebody to do something that they don't want to do. It can also lower brand image, possibly devaluing the product, and reinforce undesirable behavior where patrons might come to expect a discount. So when setting your discount strategy for reopening, there are a few things to consider so you don't devalue your brand. And the first is communication. As much as possible, you want to get away from your discount sounding like a fire sale where everything must go. You don't want audience members to think the product is not valuable because you're discounting. So it's important to give a reason for your discount that communicates value, like because you supported us through COVID, we'd love to show our gratitude by inviting you back to the theater at this special reduced price. The second thing to consider is being selective with what you discount. So when you're discounting, you have a lot of levers to pull. You can discount just for particular nights or particular zones of the house. You can discount by dollars off or by percentage off. So consider which will have the highest impact on volume and the least detriment on revenue. And third, you can target your discount to specific audience segments. Who will derive the most value from the discount? It's probably likely that board members, high-level donors, people who bought top price tickets before COVID might not need a discount to incentivize a return. So you might consider a different incentive for them. And after discounting, we move on to our third and final step, which is to be flexible with your pricing strategy. So you'll want to make adjustments during your sales cycle based on demand using dynamic pricing. Dynamic pricing refers to making price changes as a result of demand during the sales cycle. And it's important to be reactive to demand and adjust prices accordingly to maximize revenue, increase capacity, and improve the perception of a full house or a popular exhibit. And like I mentioned before, there isn't any historical data or precedent for us to look towards to predict how people will behave after COVID. So all we can do is set prices with as much data as we have. And because of this, once tickets go on sale, it will be essential to monitor sales and demand and be flexible with our prices once we actually see how people's willingness to pay, what people's willingness to pay is in reality. And so dynamic pricing will be more important than ever. Now here's a really basic breakdown of how dynamic pricing works. Basically, you raise prices by a certain amount when you spot demand, and demand can be spotted for full production or exhibit, an individual performance or entry time, or for performing arts for certain sections of the house. And I'll talk more about how to spot demand in the next few slides. A frequent question we get is, how do you know how much to raise prices? And without significant analysis of your data, all we can say is be bold. If you see demand and therefore raise your ticket prices for a popular show by just $2, that's not going to make a lot of difference to your bottom line as if you raised prices by $5 or $10. And if you increase your prices and you see a slowing of sales, you can always lower the price. Another question that we frequently get is, do you ever lower prices? And the answer is rarely. Lowering prices is rarely effective in stimulating demand because the audience doesn't necessarily know you've lowered the price. So a discount is usually recommended instead since it has a communication piece attached to it. So this is an example of how to spot demand. How to spot demand. And this is looking at how to spot demand by production. So we're looking at a few comparator productions on this slide. And let's assume that performance 4, which is the yellow line, is coming up in 9 weeks. And we're using performances 1 through 3, which are historical performances that were priced similarly, to see how performance 4 is pacing in terms of single ticket sales. So obviously performance 4 is pacing ahead of the others, which is an indicator that this performance is in demand. And it's important to note that when organizations first start out with a dynamic pricing strategy, they often tend to focus on raising prices based on a particular capacity. So for example, let's raise our prices when we get to 65% full. And that's certainly better than doing no dynamic pricing at all, but focusing only on capacity means that you're missing out on other opportunities for revenue along the way. So if we wait until performance 4, the yellow line, gets to 65% capacity to raise prices, which is at the dotted line, which just appeared on the screen, it means we'd probably have to wait a few more weeks to raise prices, but we would have missed out on a lot of opportunity to gain additional revenue between now and then. If we raise prices now at 9 weeks before the performance, even if it's only by $5, that's an additional $250 in potential revenue that we would have missed out on had we waited until we got to 65% capacity. So something as simple as recognizing when a performance is ahead of normal can have a substantial impact on revenue. And this is an example of how to spot demand by individual performance. So this report has a row for each performance during the run of a production. On the bar chart for each performance, the colored bars represent sold tickets and the white represents open seats. And here we can see that the 2 performances on Sunday and the performance on Tuesday are selling far more tickets than the other performances. So we would consider raising prices for these 3 performances. However, if this were a real example, I would hope that the ticket prices would have been raised earlier, because there aren't a lot of tickets left for those popular performances, and therefore there's not a lot of revenue to be gained from dynamic pricing. And a chart like this could be used to monitor sales and implement dynamic pricing for museums as well. Just replace the performance date with admissions for day of week and time of day. So to wrap up this section, I just want to reiterate that the earlier you catch demand, the more revenue you can make from it. And this is why we don't only look at capacity sold when determining whether or not to dynamically price, because by the time you hit 65% capacity, it's too late. You'll be missing out on revenue opportunities along the way. Okay, so to wrap up, let's just review the steps for pricing for reopening. So first, you want to set your starting prices to optimize revenue and accessibility and use differentiated pricing. Then you want to create a strategic discounting plan to stimulate sales and re-encourage the theater habit. And finally, be flexible with your prices. So adjust prices to match demand during the sales cycle. Okay, so I'm going to pass the spotlight back to Jennifer to wrap us up.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jamie. So to wrap up, I just want to leave you with a few tips that we hope you'll take away from this presentation. So first of all, as I think we've said over and over, always keep in mind that perceptions of value are unique to each person for each event. And the keys to unlocking that value are offering multiple price points so that everyone can pay the price that matches their perceived value, as well as communicating that value so that your patrons feel like they're paying the right amount for the value of the product. When you're pricing for digital experiences, remember that all of the same pricing principles still apply. Don't reinvent the wheel just because the product is different. Be strategic about your discounting. Make sure you're being deliberate about what discounts you offer and who you offer them to. And finally, be flexible. If your prices aren't working, don't be afraid to change them. Make adjustments until you get your prices right. So that's everything we have for you today. If you want more information about what we talked about and additional resources, this is our website, jcainc.com/artsmarketing. At that site, you'll find pandemic resources, lots of blogs we've written, videos we've made. And at the bottom of that page, you can also sign up for our newsletter if you want to stay up to date with what we're doing. And I think we have a few minutes left for some questions. So again, go ahead and put those in the Q&A box. And if you want to reach out to us directly, here are emails for both Jamie and I, and our website is there again at the bottom of the screen.
Perfect. Thank you guys so much. So we do have a couple of questions that came in. The first one was over in the chat, and Karen asked, how do you define the difference between vision and mission as it applies to value-based pricing? So that kind of goes back to what Jamie was talking about in the first section. Do you want to take that?
Yeah, sure. So I think there's a lot of different ways that people define mission and vision, but basically how we're thinking about it in terms of pricing is mission is the overarching broad thing that your organization does or provides to the community. And so for example, if your mission was to provide access to the whole community to the arts, which is a very non-specific mission, you would want to make sure that you have accessible ticket prices available and that everybody has access to those accessible ticket prices. Vision is I think more about how you see your organization completing that mission and how you see your organization evolving and growing. And so I think if you had a vision like in 3 years, we want X% of our audience to be new, to not have come to a performance before, for example. And then you might want to use pricing to incentivize that action. So what messages are your pricing sending to new audiences that you want to acquire, and how is that attracting them to your organization? So that's how I define it.
Yeah, that makes sense. The next question we have is from Joe. He asks, can you please give more examples of some things we can do to add more value to our digital ticket pricing? You mentioned having more time to view as one example. What would you offer for each level when offering 5 to 9 options for tiered pricing? At the moment, I'm struggling to think of effective ways to flesh out that many levels.
Sure. Yeah, I think one thing that's important to keep in mind is you don't the actual thing that you're offering doesn't need to be different for every single price option. It could be something like messaging the lowest price as, accessible price point for those who need it, or, the better words than that. But that's the idea, to kind of encourage people to only choose that option if it's truly what they can afford. So things like that, or you might message, this is our individual ticket price, this is our family ticket price for 2 to 4 viewers. So it can be things like that too. It doesn't have to just be what you are giving them. It can be about what their experience is like. And then it could also be things like the ability to stop and start, or pause and come back to it, or view it for 2 weeks as opposed to just 24 hours. So it depends on what you're offering, but I think there's a lot of options in terms of how you can message it and what you can offer. I hope that helps.
Next, we have a question from Dylan. He mentioned a friend or colleague was recently asked about whether he was going to offer equity-based ticket pricing. Do you guys have any thoughts on equity-based ticket pricing?
Jamie, do you want to take that one?
I was going to say you could take it since you're our equity resource.
I guess we don't have any strong feelings on it. I think it's just like anything else where, if there's a reason to offer different pricing, go for it, as long as the messaging, as long as you can make the messaging make sense. I guess we don't have a great answer for you on that.
We have a question from Dale Lewis, our co-chair of our board. And I was actually thinking the same thing as I was listening to your presentation today. So how would you view the pricing model of a non-for-profit membership organization during COVID? Can this apply to like membership levels and not just events?
Oh, yes, absolutely. So we focus specifically, this presentation is mostly around, in our actual examples, around single ticket sales, but everything is interrelated in an organization. So your single ticket sales, they affect what your membership prices are, and that also affects what your what your prices are for your cafe or parking, because it's all part of the same experience, and people kind of track how much they're spending for the complete experience. Jennifer, do you want to talk about pricing for subscriptions or membership, how that should be differentiated or related to ticket prices, single ticket prices?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right in that you always want to be thinking about how they relate to single ticket prices, but then the same concept of how do subscription prices relate to one another is important as well. So you want to think about what choices are your patrons making, what prices are they seeing at the same time. If I decide I want a full season subscription or a full year digital membership, and I'm presented with the options, you want to think about how those options compare to one another so that you can kind of be aware of how your patrons may be making those choices and how the prices might affect one another.
Mm-hmm. And you also want to, for subscriptions and membership, understand what people value in a subscription or membership, because it's not always discounts. It's not always like subscribers get the best seats at the best price. It could just be that they get the best seats, or that they feel like they're a member. It doesn't necessarily need to be a discount to say that a subscription or membership has value.
And what are your thoughts on pay what you can memberships? Do you guys ever encounter that? Do you have any thoughts on a pay what you can ticket price?
Yeah, we've definitely seen folks have success with pay what you can ticket pricing for sure. I tend to still prefer laying out options, kind of like we showed, laying out 5 or 7 options with, if it fits your mission, offering a $0 price option. That's completely valid. A lot of organizations, that's a really important thing to include, and fully support that as an option. And we've seen research again and again that offering a $0 ticket option along with prices, you can still make money doing that. People will pay if they can. As far as pay what you can memberships, Jamie, do you have any experience with that? That's not something I think about quite as much.
I haven't seen that. No, yeah, I haven't seen that. We've seen differentiated membership options pricing, but not pay what you can.
Okay. Let's go back over to the Q&A. So Amy, I have just taken over as executive director of an organization that has traditionally not charged for performances, but has relied on sponsorships and memberships for its operating budget. It has also struggled financially. I plan to start charging for content and am planning to use the excitement about the return to in-person events to introduce this change. Should I consider lower price points to start with as a way to ease our audiences into the idea of paying for performances?
I think something to consider when you're thinking about starting with lower prices is how challenging it's going to be to then raise them. I think it's important to think long term and where would you like your prices to be. And I think jumping from $0 to close to that price is actually going to be easier than trying to step it up to that price. However, offering multiple price points, again, as we keep saying, so that one of them is lower so that people have that option, I think that's going to be your key to making that work. One way you could kind of adjust into that is playing with your inventory. Starting with most of your tickets at that lower price, with only some at the higher price, and then gradually making more and more at that higher price. That might be a better way to step into it than to do it with just pricing alone.
That's a great idea. Okay. In regards to dynamic pricing, how do you continually adjust pricing without having your customers realize to hold out for the lowest price?
Yeah, so we actually don't recommend using dynamic pricing to lower prices because if you need to stimulate demand, lowering the price isn't necessarily going to do that because people aren't going to keep checking back to see if the price is lowered. What's better to do is to discount and use a really targeted strategic discount that goes to a specific group of audiences that would value that discount, because that will incentivize people to act. And also if it's really targeted, it won't train your full audience to expect that discount. This is always also why sometimes people will recommend organizations discount early, so you get kind of that demand in before a single, so you have some front loading of the house, I guess, so you don't have to discount later.
I also really love communication of dynamic pricing in saying that, prices will go up on this date, or we do dynamic pricing, so this is the price now, but it may go up as we get closer to the performance. Audiences in general are getting used to arts organizations doing dynamic pricing, and so they'll be totally accepting of that message, and it can help train your audience to actually buy sooner if they want to get the best price, which is good for both of you.
Definitely. Great. And the last question we have here, if anybody has anything else, we still have a couple minutes we can dedicate. So pop it into the Q&A feature. Joe asks, in your experience, have you seen more success in offering videos as a live stream only or as an on-demand experience? We've had mixed results experimenting with scarcity. We've also had celebrity-driven virtual benefits readings with high ticket prices during a live stream, but then offered them as an on-demand experience later at 1/10 of the price to appeal to audiences interested in the lower cost option. What's your opinion on that model?
Yeah, we actually looked at this in our study that we did on digital performances, and we found that per performance, those live streams bring in more revenue. More people want to attend that live performance on that day, but a recorded performance offered over a longer period of time is going to bring in more total revenue as opposed to a per performance basis. So that live performance is going to bring in a lot for a single day, but if you can do it over a period of, say, 2 weeks, over time, you're going to end up bringing more in. At least that's what we've seen so far. So I love the hybrid idea of doing it live and then offering a lower price for the next few weeks. I don't know if 1/10 is what I would go for. I might try to keep those prices closer together. But yeah, I like that hybrid idea a lot.
Great. Are there any more questions? Okay, well, we have Jamie and Jennifer's email addresses and contact information on this slide. As I mentioned, we will be recording, we did record this, and we will submit the slides to you as well. So you'll have their contact information. If anything comes up, I'm sure they'd be willing to answer any questions that you might have. And I think that ends our presentation today, if no one has any more questions. So I hope you all found this helpful and informative. I know there's a lot to digest. It's a lot of data, but maybe you'll go back and look at your ticket pricing and figure out ways you can incorporate some of these concepts and ideas that they brought to you today. So thank you so much. Oh, and a Q&A just came in and said, thank you so much for all this amazing information. And I second that, Amy. Jamie, Jennifer, thank you very, very much. This is wonderful. And if we can maybe do a follow-up webinar later in the year when things are starting to become a little bit more known of how people are responding to in-person performances, I think that would be a really great asset.
Great. Well, thank you so much. We've loved talking to you.
Great. Oh, thank you so much. All right.
All right.
See you soon. Bye. Bye.